Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and great to be back here discussing trade again. What a splendid morning this morning. So much on the tariffs, a lot to unpick, and a lot to consider what New Zealand's response should be in particular areas. The re-election of Donald Trump as the next president portends a significant shift in global trade, as we've heard. We're really privileged to have here 4 leading trade experts in New Zealand. They've all been versed at foreign affairs, they've worked in trade and negotiating, they've worked in corporates, they've worked as lawyers. Not all of them, but I mean, that gives you an idea of the breadth of skills across the table. Talking with Sarah Salmond, I mean, she is a partner at MinterEllisonRuddWatts in Auckland. She is well known in trade circles. She has specific expertise and she is highly regarded by clients and competitors, I should say, as well. Next to her, Simon Tucker. Simon has been with Fonterra for a considerable amount of time now. He's Director of Global Stakeholder Affairs internationally, so he has a very wide brief beyond New Zealand and the US. It's very broad for Fonterra. He's a former diplomat and he has, Recovering diplomat, sorry. You weren't supposed to hear that, Ben Corey. Maybe still recovering. And also Fiona Cooper, also having been a diplomat. She has worked as the leader of the New Zealand Australia Leadership Forum. She has been the leader of this particular organisation, the NZ-US Council, before. She's worked in corporate affairs and she has a very broad canvas. I'm not quite so sure about Vangelis. I think you said spent a lot of your time in the ministry, but you are our leading trade negotiator and you've been across a range of very interesting negotiations in the last few years. And in fact, you've been across everything pretty much, haven't you? Along with ministers. So, I mean, we are privileged and it's a very, as I said, a very skilled expert team. I'd like to start with you, Sarah, and as we've heard today, individual exporters and traders are nervous at the prospects of tariffs of up to 20% being applied. Clearly, we don't know detail of any tariff regime that might be introduced. But how do you read the room, and particularly the kind of commentary we've heard earlier today?
Thanks so much, Fran, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. I think it's really important to distinguish between what President-elect Trump said he would do on the campaign trail and what he actually can and is likely to do in reality. So many of you, like me, will have watched the campaign quite closely and will have seen that tariffs was a really big part of his platform this time around. So the idea that he's floating is to introduce significant tariffs of various different rates on various different targets with the aim of boosting US manufacturing, creating jobs, and importantly, creating excess revenue to pay for other flagship policies like tax cuts. So we've all heard about a 60% tariff on goods from China, 25% on goods from Mexico, unless you're a car, then it's 100 to 200, etc., etc. There is one of the tariff proposals that is causing particularly concern in New Zealand, and that is this idea that we could have a 10 to 20% tariff across the board that would apply to everyone not caught by something else, that it could apply to goods exported from New Zealand. This could have a significant impact on New Zealand. The US is our second biggest export market. And in many respects, you will find people export often with a profit margin of 5 to 30%. So if you do some basic maths there, a 20% tariff when you only have a 5% margin means your trade stops. And in some cases, we will find trade may stop, or it simply will not be as profitable. So that is what President-elect Trump said on the campaign trail. But then there are various factors that suggest that President-elect Trump is going to act swiftly and decisively to implement his plan. So the first is that he really does seem very determined to do this. It's a central part of his election campaign. He is more experienced and confident than he was first time round. He's emboldened by his very decisive election victory, having both houses, and the popular vote, and he's not seeking re-election. And as many of you will know, he has surrounded himself with a team of relatively new to politics folks, who many of whom are actually quite vocal supporters of his tariff policy. It's also important to realise the powers that he does have to do things at his own discretion, his executive powers. So he actually has much ability to impose tariffs swiftly, using, if there are any trade lawyers in the room, it's Section 201, 232, 301 of the Tariff Act and the emergency powers under IEPA. So he has a lot of discretion to impose these tariffs, and he has used these powers before. It is possible that he could use some of them as early as day 1, 20th of January next year. But there are also factors that are likely to temper his response here. So for some of his broader, more controversial tariff proposals, he is likely to need congressional approval. And even though the Republicans have both houses, there is not an enormous amount of support, so it seems, for across-the-board tariffs targeting the US's allies. There will also be a lot of lobbying, retaliatory action, threats of retaliatory action, and legal challenges. This is going to be a very active space in the new year. On the legal side, I don't think President-elect Trump is going to be particularly concerned about WTO challenge, but he will be concerned about legal challenge, particularly in the US. So you might be thinking, okay, how does this impact New Zealand specifically? As I said, the US is New Zealand's second biggest export market. It's a very big market for our primary producers. And I think possibly the most exposed sector is our sheep, meat and beef sector, not least because it is our number one export sector, but also because domestic farmers and processors of meat in America have for a long time been campaigning for tariff action to be taken against imports from New Zealand. There will be other New Zealand exporters who are also going to be affected, particularly those who have thin margins into the US. For others, maybe it won't. It will just be another cost of doing business. These are the direct effect of tariffs. There will also be displacement effects. So if we find that huge volumes of Chinese products can no longer go into the US, they are going to be on the global market. In some cases, they will be depressing prices. I wanted to weave something positive into my presentation, so just to say there may also be some positive windfall gains for consumers. All this to say, it is really impossible to know what is going to happen next year, but the potential for harm is real and significant, and for that reason, I think if I leave you with nothing else today, it's to say I do think that we would be prudent to prepare. So how do we do that? First of all, act now. Tariffs can be imposed rapidly, as I said, and if you delay, it risks losing the chance to adapt your supply chains and contracts in ways that is favourable to you. It's really important to assess your exposure, consider risk to your supply chain, your pricing, your margins, check your contract and work out who actually pays for the tariff and see if there's any scope to renegotiate. I think it's really important to work with US customers now to work out what their position is and potentially adjust current contractual terms if you need to and if it's possible. This will help you avoid future disputes. For new contracts, anyone going into new business now, make sure those contracts have some flexibility built in to account for the uncertainty that we're heading into. And also you might want to explore alternatives like early shipping, stockpiling, doing US final stage processing or diversifying into new and potentially safer markets. Very important to collaborate with customers, with trade associations, government bodies, especially MFAT and NZTE. If this all kicks off, everybody is going to be in Washington trying to lobby, and not every little guy is going to get the ear of a decision maker. So the more that we can feed and equip NZTE and MFAT to advocate for us, the better. Also, mobilising our US partners. I do think the new administration will be more interested in what US parties have to say than what we have to say. So I do want to leave you though with a message that I do think that careful planning means that New Zealand exporters will be able to navigate these complexities and safeguard their market positions, and actually there will be some opportunities there that we can secure if we approach this strategically. Thanks.
Thank you. Simon, Fonterra is New Zealand's largest company. It has a growing footprint in the US and quite sophisticated, as we heard earlier today, with a strong focus on sustainability. Tell us about the strength of that business, particularly your partnerships and your scenario planning leading up to the presidential election.
Yeah, thanks, Fran. Kia ora, everyone. Great great to be here. Indeed, the US is a really important market. It's the New Zealand dairy sector's third largest export market. About 5% of New Zealand's dairy exports go there. Interestingly, certainly for Fonterra, it's a very high value market. We sell a lot of value-added protein, heavy ingredients into the US food industry. I mean, we have a range of different business channels, I would say, in the US. We have obviously our cross-border exports. We do a range of joint venture, and I think we've got somewhere around 10 or 11 joint venture or manufacturing partnerships in the United States across the length and breadth of the country. We're selling IP in the US. We have, for example, a partnership with Land O'Lakes, one of the biggest dairy companies in the US, where they make, under license, our food service cream cheese from US milk. And then, probably, and we've had some content on this morning, a really interesting area is the innovation partnerships. The US is such a driver of innovation across many industries, and the food sector is one of them. So, we have partnerships with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology around sort of decarbonisation of food production. One of the more interesting things we're doing recently is we've established the K2A Fund, which is essentially us establishing out of San Francisco almost a sort of venture capital fund where we can set up a different business funded, which will look at some of the cutting edge biotechnology opportunities that we think will be important to bring into our value-added ingredients business and invest through that. So there's quite a lot going on. You mentioned scenarios. One of the challenges when your board, I'm sure there's lots of businesses in this room, start asking you about what you are doing to mitigate geopolitical risk. Yes, you can't really say, I'll just give the president a call and ask him what he's going to do. So probably one of the few tools you have in your toolbox is scenario planning, and we have used this a lot in geopolitical risk situations, because if you're going to have an oh crap moment, it's much better to at least thought through what your game plan will be in the aftermath of that. So we had a President Harris game plan and a President Trump one. At least now we know we can put one on the shelf and get on with the other one. But I think as we've heard throughout the course of today, there's an awful lot of uncertainty about what exactly this means. I mean, I should be clear, and I think I'm really encouraged by the way the New Zealand government's looking at this. Our first priority as NZ Inc. should be to do everything we can to avoid the tariffs being applied. That's certainly by far our first preference. We think we have very good reasons why New Zealand should not be incorporated, and we will do everything we can to support NZ Inc. efforts to achieve that. If we do go with tariffs, we have thought through some of the scenarios here. A lot of our business, and Charlotte talked a bit about this morning, are with some of the largest food companies in the United States or in the world, frankly. We are in partnership with them with long-term, multi-year service agreements. In many cases, we're doing R&D together. So, there is a framework where we will address this question of how we're going to accommodate new cost into that model. In other cases, I think Sarah's sort of painted out quite clearly. You look at the profitability of trade. If you're having to suddenly pay 10 or 20% margin on something you weren't previously, then you'll have a good hard think about whether it makes sense to pay that tariff or share that tariff with a customer, how much of that cost you can pass on. I think, again, one of the things that gives us a bit of confidence for Fonterra, we do business in about 120 markets around the world. We have pretty good optionality, and we have pretty good visibility on the relative profitability of one line of business compared to another, and there might be options to make choices. Probably the hardest thing, and we'd all be grappling with this, is what I would call the secondary impacts. The reality is the US is one of the three biggest dairy exporters in the world. They export about 18% of their production. If they're going to start trade disputes with countries that either import or export dairy, that's interesting. We heard a little bit about Europe this morning. They are by far the largest dairy exporter. What happens if the US and Europe get into conflict? What are the overflows onto the world dairy market? Similarly, China is the biggest import market for dairy. What happens if dairy gets caught up in some sort of trade dispute there? Even closer to the US's biggest export market is Mexico, and President Trump seems quite likely to go into a USMCA renegotiation with quite an appetite for further concessions. So you can see even close to home there could be secondary impacts, and we'll think carefully around what are the risks for Fonterra and what are the opportunities. That the global dairy traded market is a finite thing, and it's very hard for one of the big players to get disrupted without it having flow-on effects to third and fourth tier markets. That the final thing, and this is my positive point, Sarah, this looks challenging in some ways, but global dairy trade has never been particularly easy, I would say. We've been selling dairy products to the United States, our legacy companies, for 150 years. So, we do look at the future with a degree of confidence in our ability. In fact, frankly, I would say, given how distorted global dairy trade has been for decades, despite the good work of succession of governments and trade negotiators, we know our way around and how to navigate this stuff reasonably well. So we will go into this with confidence that it's going to be disruptive for everyone, but we can do okay. And the reality is, despite years of liberalisation, Fonterra only has access to 13% of global dairy consumption at tariffs of less than 10%. So we already know what the world of tariffs looks like. So we hope for the best, but if some of these scenarios play out, I think we're in a reasonable position. Global dairy demand is still healthy. People are going to eat, so we'll make it work.
That's a good way of looking at it. Fiona, you head and lead the New Zealand United States Council. Clearly there will be some international trade disruption, but New Zealand has made great headway with the United States in recent years. How do you assess the importance of the relationship, and what can the Council and Kiwi businesses do to further advance our interests in this uncertain time?
Thank you, Fran. I think the Prime Minister set out the importance of the relationship very well this morning. We do share a strong friendship and partnership, and it's based on shared values and interests, including a commitment to promoting a free, democratic, secure and prosperous world. And as we go forward, we need to bear that interest in mind. As the world becomes increasingly complex and uncertain, I think that spirit of partnership becomes even more important. At the government-to-government level, the two countries have been collaborating very closely over a very broad array of areas, from foreign policy, trade and defence to customs, and increasingly science, technology and the space sector. And as the Trade Minister pointed out, the US is one of our most important trading partners. Trade has been growing very well, even without a trade agreement. It's a very large and valuable market of over 345 million people, and it is the land of opportunity. I don't need to rehearse the trade statistics. You all know, second largest market and third largest trading partner. But for New Zealand, I think the USA is a business innovation success story, as we've seen from some of those amazing innovative companies talked about today. Many New Zealand companies have invested in the US, they've taken their innovative goods and services there, and they're making excellent money doing it. Business is flourishing. American and New Zealand companies work very well together. So the bilateral relationship is in the best position it can be as we head into this next phase of the relationship with the incoming administration. But as we've all heard today, it is an uncertain environment, so what can we do? As we heard from the Prime Minister and also Greg Foran, it's all about building relationships and demonstrating that we are a reliable and trusted partner, whether that's in business or in government. The New Zealand government is working hard to establish relationships with the incoming administration. The government's been preparing this for a long time and had the foresight of appointing Rosemary Banks as New Zealand's ambassador to the United States. She worked with President Trump during his first administration. So relationships really do matter. That's the best way to find out what's happening with US policy and provide input to them on the issues that matter to us. And New Zealand businesses have to play their part too in this area. I encourage New Zealand businesses to be focused on strengthening your relationships in the US private sector and communicating about what's happening. So talk to your customers and your partners and other stakeholders to find out what's happening in your sectors. And I think it's really important that the business community talk to New Zealand officials, feedback what you are hearing from your stakeholders in the US. Share that information to help our officials build up a broad picture of what's happening. And I think that is one area where the NZ-US Council can be helpful at the interface between business and government. Thanks, Fran.
Thank you. Vangelis, as New Zealand's lead trade negotiator, you've been warning for some time that the golden weather for trade policy is over and things have got harder. So please share with us the strategies New Zealand's been developing to manage and mitigate risks out there.
Thanks very much, Fran. I mean, the first thing to say is thanks to President Trump, he's made trade great again. So, you know, I get to talk again about trade all over again. But look, in all seriousness, I mean, I am sorry about the end of the golden weather, but it well and truly is over. I think the observation I wanted to make, and I don't know if that slide is available for me. So I wanted to give you a sense of what we're trying to do, but first I wanted to pick up on you know, the immediate term strategy that we have working with the United States and the new administration. So it's very much as Fiona has outlined. There's two elements to this. One is the core diplomacy. So it's the work of the embassy, the work of the consulate in LA, and the work that all of us do, and by that I do mean the NZ Inc. operation, not just the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Build those relationships, meet and work with the new administration, whoever they are, as they now emerge. That becomes a core part of the diplomacy of gathering information, intelligence, and thinking about how we then position ourselves, because that's the second part. There's the core diplomacy, but it has a purpose. And the purpose is to inform both the positioning of New Zealand in Washington and on the US radar, but also what kinds of messages we want to bring in. So I want to encourage you to pick up Fiona's point, which is please do keep us informed about what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're thinking, because there are some really important messages that we'll be wanting to retail into the US system. Reliable, provider of safe food, a good partner across a whole range of issues. Looking back at the work that Fonterra did during COVID, for example, lots of great examples in the high-tech, the space agency space. So looking to position ourselves there, reminding the United States that nearly 95% of their exports to New Zealand enter tariff-free. So if you want a reciprocal tariff act, we're up for it. So it's those kinds of things, those elements of the messaging and then the positioning and then the timing of the engagement that is going to be really important. That's the core diplomatic work. Look, at the same time, we do have a sort of a longer term strategy. The government's been very clear about doubling exports, and that does bring me to the graph here that you see here. So you see what we've been trying to do here is ensure that as much trade as possible of New Zealand is covered by international treaties. So legally enforceable trade agreements. We do have a significant gap, and that is that 16% of our exports that go to the United States. We don't have a free trade agreement with the United States, but we do with these other partners, and it's very important, I think, to focus particularly on the CPTPP piece, because that is a core part of our diplomacy more generally. And so I want to give you a bit of a flavour of what the strategy is. It's in 5 parts. And the first part is the negotiating piece. So that is going to be about India. It is really important that you see the agreements that the government recently concluded with the United Arab Emirates and the GCC as key parts of building that resilience. So needing to take those opportunities, conclude those trade negotiations that provide new access, and in fact, please remember, giving New Zealand exporters preferences, in other words, advantages in some of those critical markets, not least in the Middle East, where we know there's good money to be made. Then, of course, there's India. The government's been very clear with us as officials that India is a huge priority. And if you look at the graph, or the table there, one big gap we have is the United States, the other big gap is India. So we've got nearly 75% of New Zealand's exports are covered by treaties. We've got a gap, and that gap is the United States and India, and then a number of other smaller partners. So we do have, and we are really focusing, and no stone will be left unturned to kind of find ways into a process with India as well. And indeed, the long-standing objective with the United States. The second part of the strategy, so that's the negotiate piece. The next part is the expansion and enforcement of our existing agreements. And again, CPTPP is a key part of that. So the expansion of CPTPP, which now of course includes another G7 economy, close friend of the United States, the United Kingdom, they are now, in 3 weeks' time, will become a full member of CPTPP. That is a very significant development. If you think about who's in CPTPP, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the UK, you've got some of the critical partners for the United States in there in this very important anchoring agreement as I think about it. Enforcement becomes a really important part. As this world gets more troubled and as the jungle starts to grow back, we do need to send messages out there that actually New Zealand will defend its, its access points that were negotiated in good faith through the agreements. So you should interpret the move to take Canada to a further phase in the dispute settlement case as a really important indicator for that, not just for Canada, but our determination also to protect the rights of New Zealand exporters to get the access that we negotiated and secured. The third element in this, so negotiate, expand, enforce, the third element is resolve non-tariff barriers. You will see a big focus from our ministry, from other agencies, MPI, Customs, MB, zeroing in on the non-tariff barriers that New Zealand exporters face out there. And that's where we need more information from you about the problems you face. You are not alone in them. We can help you. It is what the diplomacy out there does. And again, I do want to emphasize it's a New Zealand Inc. operation. The fourth dimension to this is innovate. So we will continue to find ways to shore up the rules-based system because that is still vitally important to us. That innovation piece includes things like the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, finding ways to make trade easier for you digitally, paperless trade, driving growth and productivity back into our system, using the rules-based system out there and finding ways to support that through what we're calling open plurilaterals that we look to develop to support that system that is in, and I think going to be in quite a bit of trouble over the coming weeks. If I could pull up the last slide, because the last part of the work we do is to support you. It's the S, the support. So negotiate, expand, enforce, resolve, innovate, and support. And here's the 10 most terrifying words in the English language. Many of you heard me use that line before. We're from the government, we're here to help. But we really are. And again, I do want to emphasize it's a New Zealand Inc. operation, so we've got some things there. Please do sign up for the market intelligence reports. They are going to be a critical part of how we try to help you access not just the US market, but other emerging opportunities that are going to come out throughout there. There's a suite of measures and instruments that you can use on our website, but also on the NZT website, on the MPI website, that help you in very practical ways. What's the tariff on X in which country, Y? So please don't think that you're alone. There's a window there as well where you can go in and you can say, I've got a problem in this market, can you help? And then there's an activated team that we have across agencies that works on focusing on those, using the levers we have internationally, using our embassies, using the staff offshore, whether they're from MPI or MFAT, or MB, Treasury, whoever they might be, really leaning in to support you. So you are absolutely not alone. These are going to be challenging times, but there are real opportunities, and you should not be in any doubt about how we've got a plan, both a plan focused on Washington, but a plan more broadly, and we're determined to help you through this time. Thank you.
You are determined. Thank you. One of the issues has come up, and we'll come to the questions soon because they are heading up there. If you could actually put the questions on. Yes, thank you, so I could read them. One of the issues which has come up is the rebalancing, or how you actually assess China versus US. How do you play that out? I mean, obviously, Sarah, you have clients across both. How do you work that?
I think that's probably a question for Simon.
All right, Simon, you go.
Oh, well, I think it's well understood. China is Fonterra's largest export market. It's a fantastic market. We have great access via the free trade agreement. We've grown a multi-billion-dollar food service business from nothing into a market-leading position. We're selling value-added ingredients. It's a really exciting market. It will continue to be, and it's a really important market. At the same time, the United States also is one of our most important markets. I think we will always follow good opportunities to exploit these, and we've got great customer partnerships in both. So it's a nightmare scenario that a big business that sells products globally is going to have to start making sort of choices. I think to sort of Vangelis's point, we know that we're in a different era, and trade is a lot more complicated. I think from the dairy perspective, we will follow demand and we will follow customers, and we will seize on opportunities to innovate and create value for our farmer owners. And we see that as a global proposition, and it will continue to be a global proposition for us for the foreseeable future. So, yes, geopolitics has an impact, but as I said earlier, we want to continue to think that we can navigate this successfully. And we think, great alignment, I think, between the New Zealand export sector and where the New Zealand government is on all of that too. So I know I'm not really answering your question, but
That's all right.
two critical markets, and they will continue to be for the foreseeable future.
Navigating both markets, Vangelis, how do we do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly as Simon said. This is a critical part of not just the diplomacy, but also how business gets done. And I think the thing that we're going to have to be thinking about, just to pick up on Sarah's point, if there is going to be a universal tariff applied to everyone, that's one thing which I think all of us can kind of. No one's going to be delighted, but at least everyone's being treated equally. The bit that I have a bit of anxiety about is, first of all, that there's going to be exceptions, whether they're country exceptions or sectoral exceptions or both, and that will then be very challenging for New Zealand if we get left out of, or parts of our economy get left out of some of those exceptions and so on. That, I think, those second order effects or the secondary elements, I think, are very challenging. I think the other thing to watch out for is, so what does it look like when Europe retaliates, China retaliates, and anyone else piles in onto that? That is not going to be a particularly attractive scenario for us as we look to kind of navigate between all of those things. I think one of our big challenges that we're going to need to be quite thoughtful about is, how does this look for ASEAN economies as they deal with the overcapacity of China, that product being diverted? How do they respond? This is very close to where we are, and those are really important markets for us as well. So I think there's a lot of unknowns out there, but I think for me, it's that secondary element that really troubles me. And I've got to say, what it all means for something that is very and should be very dearly held by everyone in this room is the rules-based trading system, and that uncertainty that's now being created. That I think is something that we're going to really, and that needs to be priced in by business. I think we've got to really be thinking about that. But again, I do want to emphasize, absolutely no one is alone in this. We are here to absolutely help you through what is going to be turbulence, and we've done this before. So please do get in touch.
We have a question here for Sarah, and talks about your comment on considering finishing products in the United States. Is there any estimate based on prior US tariffs as to what percentage of product value needs to be to avoid tariffs?
Sure. I'm going to think about how to answer this to give a useful answer without losing the rest of the audience in technicality. But essentially, in order to avoid a tariff, you want to try and reconfigure your product so it becomes of US origin. And there's lots and lots of rules on US origin, but the basic principles is that you need to have a substantial transformation occurring in the US for it to be US origin. What you will find is there are specific rules for specific products. So sometimes, you require certain kind of changes, but it's not changes in price. It will be, often it's change in tariff heading or change in some kind of composition. So I guess the key piece of advice to the person who asked the question, have a look at any specific rules that might apply to your product and think about, can I do a substantial transformation or final finishing of my product in the US, in which case it might be an avenue worth exploring.
We're getting into some quite broad questions, so we will have a go. International students contribute $5 billion to the economy pre-COVID. We have an opportunity as a safe destination in uncertain times. How can we use policy settings to grow this? And I wonder, Fiona, if that's one for you, thinking about the positioning of New Zealand?
Yes, I think it's probably one for ministers, but they're not here. But of course, I mean, the US is an important source of students for New Zealand. There's important collaborations that happen between New Zealand universities and the United States. I think that's a big area of opportunity, and it's something that New Zealand can lean into. So I would say, in principle, yes, but it's one for the government. They've got a lot of priorities right now.
And I think the next one is definitely one for the government, but this is, can we see the US softening on Russia, and could that soften sanctions? So I'm not sure, is anyone qualified? You are? Good.
Yeah, so
good.
I think it's possible that as part of the peace deal that President-elect Trump is going to do in 24 hours, that there may be some kind of concession on sanctions requested by President Putin. I think an important thing to bear in mind, though, is even if the US was agreed to relax or remove the sanctions, I don't think the Europeans would do that. I don't think other Western markets that impose sanctions would do that. And if you're a global business, even if the US sanctions slip away, you're probably still not going to rush back into the Russian market. So I do think, unless there's a massive change of events and all sort of allied partners remove sanctions on Russia, I think most multinationals will avoid Russia for the foreseeable future.
Another one, if US businesses are diversifying away from their dependency on China, how can New Zealand position itself to benefit from this?
You're looking at me, okay. Well, I was going to talk about how we navigate, how we put our best foot forward. I think that I think we have to take a leaf out of President Luxon's book this morning and lean into the opportunity that the United States presents. We need to focus on New Zealand's interests in pursuing, a strong bilateral relationship with the US, and we have a great story to tell. And I think that's something that we need to do, is get our story straight. And that's something that New Zealand businesses need to do as part of your relationship building in the United States. You need to be thinking about how you pitch. How is your product or service adding value to the US economy? How is it complementary to domestic production? How many jobs may depend on the products that you are supplying? So I think we all need to be thinking about storytelling and how we can pitch ourselves to the United States if that's what's required.
Excuse me. Do you want to talk about your plans next year?
Well, sure. I mean, this is a very exciting time in the relationship, and we all need to put our best foot forward. So the Council plans to take a group of New Zealand businesses up to the US next year to get in front of the new administration, leaders in Congress, excuse me, because we've got to build relationships and we've got to make them aware about New Zealand's capabilities and what we offer to the United States. Is, developing that, putting that value proposition in front of them. But not only in Washington, D.C., because there is more to America than what happens in that place. You've amazing opportunities across the states. So I expect we'll also be visiting California and probably one other state. I mean, New Zealand's doing extremely well, in Texas, as we heard from Mint Technology, but also Colorado, a real magnet for New Zealand businesses. And I think, if it all completely turns to custard in Washington, there's a lot we can still do at the state level. And we need to make sure we are building relationships at that level as well. We'll also be looking at inviting key American speakers to come to New Zealand to talk to audiences like this, although I have to say Zach Cooper has set a very high bar. It'll be a tough standard to meet, but it's important that we bring American influencers, policy makers, thinkers to New Zealand to see what we're doing and to explain to us what on earth America is doing. And we're also planning to repeat our media fellowship through which enables us to send a New Zealand journalist up to the US to see what's happening. Next year it'll be business focused, looking at examples of New Zealand success stories in the United States, and also what's happening in the US economy that's going to be great for business there and also for New Zealand businesses, because I think there are going to be success stories, and as we hear a lot about doom and gloom, I think we also have to keep an eye on the opportunities.
Thank you. Just coming back, Sarah, to the conversation we had prior to this, our sheep meat farmers have got plenty to be proud of with their exports to the US. They're meeting consumer demand and tastes. Is there a prospect that their US counterparts might lobby for a protectionist response?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of uncertainty around a lot of this, but this is one thing I'm quite certain of is that US sheep meat industries, particularly our CARF, a trade association representing farmers in the American Sheep Industry Association, I'm quite confident that in the new year they will be going into the new administration seeking some kind of imposition of tariff relief on sheep meat from New Zealand and Australia, and I do think this is probably one of the biggest risks posed by the new administration to New Zealand. These industries have been lobbying for protection from New Zealand exports for my entire career, and sometimes they've been successful. What they've been petitioning for specifically is the initiation of a dumping case, the suggestion that we dump product in the US market or that we benefit from subsidies and then that gives us a competitive advantage on the US market, or essentially that we're sort of sending in a tsunami of product and safeguards are required. There was a petition that was abandoned at the beginning of last year, but when RCAF withdrew, interestingly, they put out in a press release that they would continue to watch the situation like a hawk. And they've put out a number of press releases in the last few months showing that they're very supportive of President-elect Trump's tariff policy. So unfortunately, I do think they're going to come back. I think if you look at the data and the statistics, I'm quite confident that if any of these investigations were initiated, we would not lose, but the difficulty is we'd still be obliged to go through the motions. And if anyone doesn't know, I can assure you that US lawyers' hourly charge-out rates are very expensive. And we would spend a lot of time, money and effort fighting these cases that we would win. And while the cases were ongoing, unfortunately, they have a real chilling effect because people are reluctant to buy something when they think that their product they're buying might get slapped by retaliatory tariffs. So I think sort of similar to what Simon said earlier, the number one thing we can do here is avoid these investigations from ever being initiated, which is going to require really fantastic lobbying from our government officials, but also the likes of Beef and Lamb New Zealand and Meat Industry Association and industry participants really leaning on their customers and US advocates and stakeholders to lobby against these investigations.
One for Simon and Vangelis. Were you both buoyed by the comments by Xi Jinping about the WTO and the importance of multilateralism and staying in? Or do you regard that as simply politics?
No, I mean, I think we would all agree. It's easy to take some pot shots at the WTO, but it is just a fundamentally important piece of, sort of certainty in the global trading world that business depends on every day, whether we take it for granted or forget or not. Interesting, I was in Brussels a few weeks ago, and similarly, signals from the incoming Commission of their commitment to protecting the WTO. So I think the more voices from world leadership positions that are doing this, the better. And I think we should never forget about the importance. The WTO and its inaction at times can be very frustrating. It's easy to switch off, but this is an important institution, and we'll take all the support we can get.
Look, I obviously agree with what Simon has said. The WTO is an absolutely vital institution for us. We must not forget the things that it has done: eliminated agricultural export subsidies, has set the rules in a whole range of areas that are vital, whether you're in a services exporter. And I just want to make an observation here. Tariffs are on goods, but the fastest growing part of our exports to the United States have been actually in services. And it's really important not to forget that, because actually services are the big driver of productivity back here. So really important that we not lose sight of that. And again, the WTO provides a framework for rules that provide certainty for New Zealand services suppliers, whether you're an engineering firm, an architecture firm, an IT company. The WTO is vital. So hearing from other major players how important the institution is very encouraging and very important to us as a nation. And I just want to make the observation too that we must not forget also that the WTO is working on things called the Joint Statement Initiatives, which include more than 100 WTO members working together to agree sets of rules on electronic commerce, on domestic regulation for services, so a vital piece for us. So there's lots of really important things happening there.
And on that positive note, I think we'll finish. We have run out of time, and I do apologise for that because there is a lot of material that we haven't really canvassed. So please thank our leading experts.